They showed up with a laminated lake use restriction and a cheap sheriff's badge from Amazon. 2 HOA officers and their clipboard queen, Karen, marching toward my dock like they owned the water. I was fishing with my daughter. My boat wasn't loud. It wasn't polluting. It was a hand-built sail skiff. No engine, no noise. Just me, my girl, and the wind. But apparently that wasn't HOA approved. They pointed, shouted, and then, like an absurd cartoon, pulled out bolt cutters and started marching toward my dock post. They tried to impound my boat, on my lake, my private lake. I just smiled and let them finish their tantrum. Because what they didn't know, what would become their very expensive, legally binding nightmare, was that I wasn't part of their HOA, but their entire drinking water system was part of my lake. So I drafted a legal notice that would haunt them forever. What happens when a petty HOA tries to dictate rules on a man who literally owns the water they drink? It started with a knock. Not the kind of knock that announces company or trouble. This one was hollow, bureaucratic. 2 sharp raps followed by silence, as if the person behind the door had more authority than they did patience. I stepped off my porch, coffee in hand, and saw them standing there, 3 HOA board members I'd never met before, wearing matching polos, like they'd formed some kind of suburban tactical unit. Clipboard Karen, her mouth already pursed in judgment, flanked by 2 men built like leftover mall cops, was looking directly at my dock. My property sits on the edge of Lake Dovetail, a peaceful stretch of water bordered on one side by a gated community and on the other by me, literally just me. I bought this slice of the world 15 years ago, a full 27 acres with full riparian rights, meaning the lakefront, and most of the lake itself, belonged to me. The HOA neighborhood that sprouted up across the inlet came later, with their boxy homes and fake stucco charm, and eventually I signed an easement agreement allowing shared access to the lake under specific conditions. Namely, that it would be for passive enjoyment, swimming, kayaking, fishing, nothing motorized, nothing disruptive. I still held deeded control. They got to enjoy the view and use the water if they played nice, and for a long time, they did. Until new leadership took over that HOA board like a virus with a mission. The leader? Karen Muller. Mid-50s. Wears pearls to HOA meetings and stilettos to mailbox runs. The first time she waved at me, I instinctively ducked. Her smile didn't reach her eyes, and her handshake was somehow both limp and aggressive. And now here she was again, standing on my gravel, acting like she was about to issue a verdict. "I'm here on behalf of the Willow Ridge HOA," she said, flipping her clipboard open like it was the Constitution. "We've received several complaints about unauthorized boat activity on the lake. And unfortunately, that includes your property." I raised one eyebrow. "My boat? That little sail skiff over there?" I nodded toward the dock, where my 15-foot wooden sailboat sat tethered. No motor, no lights, just wind and craftsmanship. "Yes, that one. HOA policy strictly forbids boats over 12 feet, and no vessel can be docked overnight." I blinked. "I'm not in your HOA." The men on either side of her shifted, as if preparing for resistance. Karen didn't flinch. "The lake falls under shared jurisdiction," she announced. "And as such, we enforce community compliance for the benefit of all residents." I almost laughed. "Almost. The lake," I said slowly, "is mine. I own the shoreline, the water rights, the sediment, the fish, everything except the portion granted for passive access under an easement. Which, I should remind you, does not include enforcement powers, policy control, or overnight restrictions. So if you want to try and cite me for docking a handmade, non-motorized sailboat on my own dock, good luck." Karen smiled again, thinner, this time. "We're just trying to maintain standards. There's been a vote." She handed me a paper titled Willow Ridge Water Use Policy, 2024. In it, there were references to lake cleanliness, visual harmony, boat length limitations, and something called nautical neighborhood uniformity. I scanned it, then handed it back. "This might apply to the people behind that gate," I said, but not here. I turned around and walked back toward the porch. That should have been the end of it, but it never is with people like her. A week later, I found a bright orange violation slip taped to my mailbox. It was laughable. It claimed I was in breach of HOA Regulation 6.4 and owed a fine of $125. I ignored it. Then came the second violation, $300, citing non-compliant marine equipment. I called the HOA office and got Karen's assistant, who sounded scared just saying her name. "This is all a misunderstanding," I said. "I'm not in your OA." There was a pause. "Ms. Mueller says that doesn't exempt you from community cohesion protocols." "Then Ms. Mueller needs a map," I replied and hung up. 2 days later, they left a formal warning letter taped to my dock post. That was new. It fluttered in the wind like a surrender flag from an enemy that hadn't realized they'd already lost. "Final notice," it read, with a fake legal seal and phrases like unlawful encroachment, shared visual assets, and deterrence to community tranquility. I took it down, framed it, and hung it in my shed right next to the trout I caught with my daughter last summer. But their next move wasn't funny. On a Tuesday morning, I heard the crunch of tires on my gravel drive. I peeked out from the porch and saw them, Karen and her goons. They weren't dressed for a friendly chat. One had a bolt cutter. The other had zip ties hanging from his belt, like he thought he was Batman. Karen had a laminated lake policy page in one hand and a megaphone in the other. I didn't even know they made megaphones that small. "Sir, please come out and comply," she barked. "You have 5 minutes to remove the unauthorized vessel, or we will act on behalf of the community." I didn't move. Not yet. I just watched. The bolt cutter guy headed toward the dock. Karen followed. I set my coffee down on the porch rail and stood up. The third guy stayed behind, arms crossed, pretending to be muscle but looking more like a sunburned scarecrow. By the time I got down to the dock, Karen was pointing at my mooring line. "This will be removed today," she said. "You've had ample notice." I stepped between her and the boat. "Touch that rope, and I'll file trespassing charges so fast your grandkids will feel the paperwork." "This is a compliance matter," she snapped. "You are obstructing enforcement action." I pulled out my phone, hit record, and said clearly, "I am not part of the Willow Ridge HOA. This is private land. You are trespassing. Leave now, or I will involve law enforcement." Karen didn't back down. Bolt cutter guy lifted the tool like he was about to make his moment count. I stepped forward once, slow but sharp. He paused. Karen raised the megaphone again. "You are in direct violation of HOA." But she didn't get to finish. Because that's when my dog, Buck, came around the side of the dock. 60 pounds of retired canine muscle with a bark that could rattle a glass pane. He didn't growl. He didn't charge. He just stared, locked on. Bolt cutter guy stepped back. "Smart." Karen flinched. Then she scowled at me like I'd cheated. "You'll regret this," she said, low and venomous. "We'll take this to the board." "Good," I replied. "I'll take it to court." They left without another word. But not before the scarecrow guy snapped a photo of my boat, my dock, and me flipping them the bird. I heard nothing for a week. Then came a certified letter from a firm called Michaels Frost, claiming to represent the HOA in a water use enforcement action. The language was dense, full of fake muscle, injunctions, cease and desist, non-compliance consequences. It even cited maritime precedent. Maritime. For a lake you could swim across in 10 minutes. I laughed. Then I made a copy of the letter and sent it straight to my attorney, who specializes in land easements and HOA abuse cases. I also called the county recorder's office and pulled my original deed with the lake ownership boundaries clearly outlined in black and white. I drafted a response, full of polite legal evisceration, and attached every document. Then I waited. That same week, someone spray-painted, "Community rules apply to all," on the public access sign near the HOA entrance. Not on my property. But I knew exactly who they were trying to provoke. The HOA sent out an email blast claiming vandalism, antisocial behavior, and hostile lake occupants. That was me, apparently. A hostile lake occupant. I printed that email too. My lawyer was going to love this. What they didn't understand was simple. They weren't dealing with a lawn chair fisherman anymore. They were dealing with someone who read the fine print. Who wrote the fine print? Who built this dock plank by plank with hands that remembered what freedom felt like? And now they were trying to regulate the breeze. But if they wanted a war over water, they'd picked the wrong shoreline to cross. It didn't stop. After the failed bolt cutter stunt, I thought maybe they'd back off, retreat into their beige suburban enclave with their laminated violation slips and committee meetings about trash can placement. But instead, it escalated. Subtly at first. The kind of escalation that smells like rot under fresh paint. I started noticing a black Ford Explorer parked at the edge of the public easement path near my mailbox. Same tinted windows, same dent on the rear bumper. It would show up at 7:00 a.m. and stay parked through lunch. No movement. No one got out. It wasn't until the third day that I walked out with a pair of binoculars and caught the glint of a camera lens poking out between the front seats. That wasn't neighborly curiosity. That was surveillance. The HOA had put someone on my house. I called the sheriff's department, but the deputy who showed up just shrugged. If they're parked on public easement and not causing trouble, it's not illegal, he said. I could tell he didn't want to get in the middle of a property line squabble. But this wasn't a squabble. This was a slow-moving siege. The next week, a man in a yellow reflective vest showed up unannounced on my shoreline. Claimed he was there for a HOA, Shoreline Integrity Inspection. I asked for a badge or authorization. He flashed a generic contractor ID with the name Stewart and the logo for a landscaping company I'd never hired. I asked what he was inspecting. Just taking soil samples, sir. Making sure there's no erosion affecting community access. I reminded him that this wasn't community property and told him to leave immediately or I'd start collecting evidence for a trespassing charge. He left, but not before making a call in full view of my game camera. He said, "Yeah, he confronted me. Got pictures too. No, I didn't get to the dock. Too risky." That footage went straight to my attorney, but it didn't matter to them. Because 3 days later, I heard a buzzing sound that made my stomach knot. Not mosquitoes. Not a weed whacker. A drone. It hovered 15 feet above my dock. A chunky quadcopter with a camera on a gimbal and a little blinking red light. I stood on the dock and waved at it, stone-faced, as it pivoted to focus on my sail skiff. Then it zoomed in toward my house. I walked inside, grabbed my old deer rifle, and calmly walked back out. I didn't raise it, didn't even shoulder it. I just cradled it in my arms and stared back at that floating eye like I was reading its soul. The drone zipped off faster than a cockroach under a kitchen light. I posted the footage on a local neighborhood forum with the caption, "Willow Ridge HOA drone, trespassing over private property. Surveillance without consent is a felony." The post got over 300 likes and a string of comments, most of them anonymous. Most of them saying some version of, "They're out of control. Keep fighting." I printed the comments. My lawyer liked documentation. Then came the citation. It arrived in a manila envelope with no return address, but the county seal on the corner. Inside was a single-page notice titled, "Environmental Hazard Citation, Zoning Violation." It claimed that I was in violation of soil displacement and sediment release into a protected watershed. There was no specific event listed, no evidence, just a citation number, and a warning that further infractions could result in fines or enforcement action. At first, I was confused. Then I saw the signature at the bottom, Environmental Compliance Officer, Harold T. Kessler. The name rang a bell. Kessler. I Googled it. Turns out Harold T. Kessler was the brother of Charles Kessler, treasurer of the Willow Ridge HOA board. Same face, different branch of government. That wasn't a citation. That was a threat dressed in bureaucracy. I called my lawyer immediately. He reviewed the document and then whistled. "This isn't enforceable," he said. "It's a soft notice. It hasn't been filed through the county clerk's office, but they're trying to make you sweat. Can we counterfile?" I asked. "Oh, we can do better than that," he said. Let me show you something. That's when he pulled up the deed registry. 49 years ago, in 1975, the original property developer of Willow Ridge had negotiated with the prior owner of my land for water access rights. The contract was ancient, but binding. It stipulated that in exchange for lake water usage, HOA for things like lawn irrigation, community fountains, and the HOA clubhouse's water supply, the HOA would be granted a limited-use easement on the northeast bank of the lake, my side, the dock side. The contract was conditional, revocable upon breach, and required annual respect of property boundaries, non-interference with private docks, and no restriction of riparian rights. In short, they were allowed to use the water so long as they didn't act like they owned it. And guess what? Trying to cut my boat loose? Flying drones? Planting fake citations? That was breach, breach, and breach again. The moment I saw the language on that original contract, something cold and clean settled in my chest. I wasn't just defending my property anymore. I had leverage. I had their water by the throat, and they didn't even know it yet. But they kept pushing. 2 days after the citation, I found a sign posted directly onto my dock piling. Screwed in, not taped. O members only. Vessel use prohibited. Violators will be fined. I stared at it in disbelief. Then I took a crowbar from the shed, yanked the screws out one by one, and threw the sign into the fire pit. I called my lawyer. They've physically marked my dock with false jurisdiction. Perfect, he said. Send me pictures. That's criminal misrepresentation under the property code. And it shows intent. That night, I poured a glass of whiskey and sat on the edge of the dock with Buck at my feet. The moon lit the lake in silver ribbons, and I could see the fountains on the other side of the water, gurgling like nothing had happened. But I knew what fed them. A single intake pipe buried beneath the inlet, running directly through a submerged easement point on my parcel. I walked back inside, opened my cabinet, and pulled out the original blueprints. There it was. Utility Channel B. O water access. Conditional. Labeled. Measured. Owned. By me. I didn't act that night. No, that would come later. The execution had to be perfect. But what I did do was make 3 copies of every legal document, every citation, every photo of their signs and their drones. I began building what my lawyer would later call the water file. It sat on my kitchen table, thick as a phone book, tabbed and color-coded. Because when it came time to shut them down, I wouldn't just turn off the water. I'd bury them in paperwork and precedents so deep they'd need scuba gear to find their dignity. And the best part? They still thought I was just some cranky guy with a boat. They didn't know I held the deed to their lifeline. They didn't know I'd studied every clause they'd violated. They didn't know I'd been quiet because I was preparing. Because some wars aren't won with loud arguments or fists. They're won with maps, patience, and control over the most precious resource on earth. Water. And I owned every drop they drank. It was a Wednesday afternoon when it crossed the final line. My daughter, Annie, had taken her bike down to the local market, just 3 miles into town. 14 years old, heart full of sunlight and lake days, riding with that reckless freedom only kids who grow up surrounded by woods and water understand. She's never been the type to stir trouble. Polite to everyone, shy smile, wears a life vest even in shallow water because she knows that's my rule. So when she came back with red-rimmed eyes and trembling hands, I knew something had happened. She dropped the groceries on the porch and tried to hide her face. "Annie?" I asked. "What's wrong?" Her voice cracked when she said it. "He said I'm a trespasser, that if I keep using the lake, there will be consequences." I felt my heart stop. "Who said that?" She looked up, cheeks stained with tears. "The HOA guy. The one with the tan hat and the whistle around his neck. He was by the water jugs at the market. Said, 'You're trespassing when you're on that lake, little lady.' Then he leaned down real close and said, 'That's not your lake anymore.'" I stood frozen for a moment. And then something in me snapped. The quiet part of me. The patient part. The part that thought they'd eventually get bored and move on. That part shattered like glass under a steel boot. They had come from my boat, my dock, my property, but now they were trying to intimidate my daughter. 14 years old, and they sent their little HOA stormtrooper to corner her like some kind of enforcer in the produce aisle. That wasn't policy enforcement, that was harassment. I made Annie a cup of hot cocoa, sat her on the couch, and called my lawyer. New development, I said. They're going after my family now. I described the incident. He didn't hesitate. That's actionable. Direct harassment of a minor. Get her statement in writing. We'll have it notarized. But I wanted more than a lawsuit. I wanted them to feel what it was like to be powerless, to be surrounded. So I called for a neighborhood meeting. Not just my side of the lake, but the entire damn township. I printed flyers. I posted in the local bulletin board by the post office, and even stuck one under the wiper blade of every HOA board member's car. Water rights, property jurisdiction discussion. This Saturday, 3 p.m., Lake Pavilion. I figured if they wanted to play legal chess on my water, they could look me in the eyes while we talked about the rules. Saturday came. I set up chairs, a thermos of coffee, even brought a second box of donuts. 7 people showed up. One of them was Karen. She came wearing a blazer like she thought it was a televised debate. She brought 2 other board members, both with smug grins like they'd already won something. I stood and laid out the situation. The trespassing, the citations, the drone, the attempt to physically remove my boat, and now harassment of a minor. I laid out the easement, read the clauses aloud, and warned them of the consequences of continued interference. Karen leaned back in her chair and laughed. You're calling a town meeting because your feelings are hurt? Her voice dripped with condescension. You invited the community here to cry about a sign? No, I said, calm but razor-edged. I invited you here because the next time you put a finger on my property, you won't hear from me. You'll hear from the state. Another board member chuckled. Good luck with that. We've got precedent, sir. Community cohesion matters. We've already passed internal resolutions. Internal resolutions don't override deeds and contracts, I replied. And they sure as hell don't give you the right to harass a child. Karen stood. If you're so certain, why haven't you sued us yet? I stared her dead in the eye. Because I like watching you dig the hole deeper. She scoffed and walked off. The other 2 followed. None of the other attendees said a word. A few looked sympathetic. One old man nodded. But the message was clear. The HOA thought they were untouchable. That was fine, because I wasn't done collecting. Every act they committed after that was added to what I started calling the Lake Ledger, a folder so thick it no longer closed. Dates, photos, signatures, drone footage, fake citations. I had it all. Every chain link of their manufactured authority was being documented for dissection. And then they made their biggest mistake yet. It was early morning, fog curling low over the water like spilled smoke. I heard a metallic rattle outside. At first, I thought it was the wind knocking a loose latch on the shed. Then Buck growled low from under the porch. I stepped out with my flashlight and froze. Across the road leading into my driveway, someone had placed 5 orange traffic cones, a stretch of road-closed tape, and a metal chain looped between 2 fence posts, blocking my own damn access road. Not the public easement, mind you, my private gravel road which connects the highway to my cabin. They were trying to trap me on my land. That wasn't an inspection. That wasn't a citation. That was entrapment. I walked up, examined the cones. All of them had the Willow Ridge HOA label stenciled on the base. I took photos, zoomed in on the bolt pattern, caught the fresh tire marks from the golf cart tracks they'd used to drop them off. Then I did something I'd been waiting to do for months. I made one phone call. County Utilities Board. The voice on the other end said, "This is Officer Jennings." "Hi, this is Elijah Cross," I replied. "I'm calling regarding easement access agreement, 447B, Willow Ridge HOA water intake authorization. I am formally notifying the Board of Easement Revocation due to repeated breach." There was silence. "Sir, are you the deeded owner?" "Yes." "Do you have documentation of breach?" I have over 70 individual exhibits. Understood. Authorization to suspend water use granted pending review. We'll file the hold order by end of day. Do not tamper with the supply equipment until our field officer confirms. Copy that, I said. They'll feel it by morning. I hung up and walked out to the inlet. The control valve sits just beneath a hatch buried in the rocks. I had it installed 2 years after I bought the place, in case of zebra mussel outbreaks. A turn of the key, a twist of the valve, and the HOA's only water intake pipe would go bone dry. I waited until sunset, until I could see the clubhouse lights flicker on across the water and kids riding their bikes near the fountains. Then I lifted the hatch. One smooth turn. Click. Done. By the time they figured out what happened, it was already too late. No irrigation, no drinking water, no working toilets at the clubhouse. Their fountain sputtered and hissed like dying fish. And the panic set in. They didn't know yet that I'd filed the revocation, that it had been approved and was legally protected. They thought it was sabotage. And that's exactly how I wanted them to feel. Helpless, cornered, dry. The real war hadn't even started, but they just stepped into a battlefield where I controlled every drop. They woke up to silence, not the peaceful kind that settles after a summer storm or the hush of snowfall. This was a bone-dry silence, the kind that seeps into pipes and mocks the twist of a faucet handle. At 6:00 a.m., President Karen Mueller turned her gold-handled shower knob and was greeted not by a cascade of hot water, but by a sputter and the hiss of dry copper. Her 4-0 rainhead shower fixture whined like a dying animal. Down the street, HOA Vice President Graham Denton stared at his prized koi pond, now a cracked crater of evaporating dreams. Every lawn in Willow Ridge began to brown like toast, left in the oven too long. Sprinkler systems gasped, failed, and then shut off with a final wheeze. And then came the screams. From mothers trying to fill bottles, from seniors who couldn't flush their toilets, from teens who found their showers bone dry before school. Within hours, panic trickled through the HOA like a breached dam. The clubhouse fountains stood still, their faux Roman columns now surrounded by yellowing grass. The maintenance staff was fielding call after call about the mystery outage, and nobody had answers. Karen called the county water department, only to be placed on hold, then transferred, then told politely that the issue is with the intake point. When she asked where the intake point was, the technician said flatly, Lake Dovetail, and the property owner has suspended access. That can't be legal, Karen hissed into the phone. We've used that lake for decades. Ma'am, the tech replied, according to the easement agreement on file, access is conditional. And conditional access can be revoked. The click of the call ending was the opening bell of her unraveling. Meanwhile, I was sitting on my porch sipping coffee, Buck at my feet, Annie sketching in her notebook beside me. The sun had just crested over the water, turning the surface gold and glassy. It was the quiet before the storm, and I had never felt calmer. By 9:00 misuse. My lawyer had filed a formal cease and desist letter with the Willow Ridge HOA, accompanied by a scanned copy of the 1973 easement agreement, complete with all highlighted clauses they had violated. The letter spelled it out in plain language: violation of easement terms, including harassment, trespass, false enforcement actions, and signage tampering, had voided the access rights. Water usage was suspended indefinitely. Attempted restoration or forced access would be met with immediate legal action. We served it via certified mail, email, and a direct hand delivery by courier to the HOA mailbox. They couldn't pretend they didn't know. And then I did one more thing. I CC'd the local newspaper. And not just the newspaper. I sent the whole packet to the regional affiliate news desk. The subject line read, harasses landowner, loses access to water. I attached drone photos of the dry fountains, screenshots of their signs on my dock, and a scan of the original deed that gave me exclusive ownership of the lake. I signed it, Elijah Cross, legal landowner of Lake Dovetail. They ran it. That evening, it hit the front page of the Clearwater Sentinel. HOA cut off from water after land dispute with lake owner. By the next day, regional news stations were running the headline. HOA tyranny backfires. Entire neighborhood goes dry. Within 72 hours, my phone was blowing up with interview requests. I declined them all. I didn't need airtime. I needed consequences. And they were about to come, hard and fast. Karen and the board did exactly what desperate tyrants always do. They panicked and tried to fight back. They filed a lawsuit claiming malicious sabotage and community endangerment. Their attorney, a slick-talking guy named Byron, with hair like a car commercial, held a press conference in front of the clubhouse, decrying my dangerous vendetta and calling me a rogue land baron. I smiled when I saw the clip, because I already had my countersuit drafted. My lawyer, Elliot Kane, a surgical legal assassin with a calm voice and a memory like a steel trap, filed it the next morning. A $1.2 million claim for damages, harassment, defamation, attempted interference with utility infrastructure, and emotional distress caused to a minor. Every HOA action, every false citation, every unauthorized drone flight, every word they said to my daughter, was included, documented, and tabbed. Elliot walked into court like he was laying siege to a castle. Their lawsuit didn't survive the first hearing. Ours did. The judge reviewed the original easement, looked at the mountain of documented abuse, and issued a temporary injunction against the HOA from accessing any part of my property pending further review. I wish you could have seen Karen's face when that gavel hit the bench. But it didn't end there. When their insurance provider, Everstead Mutual, reviewed the court filings and my countersuit, they made a quiet decision. They dropped coverage. The HOA was now uninsured, exposed, and hemorrhaging legal bills. And the residents? They were furious. The ones who never voted for this chaos. The ones who just wanted green lawns and a place to walk their dogs. They started demanding meetings. Karen tried to hold a town hall, but it turned into a bloodbath. Parents screaming about dry sinks. Elderly couples shouting about their dying rose gardens. One guy shouted, "I just installed a 9-0 irrigation system last fall." Karen tried to blame me, but by then, the facts were out. My original easement documents had been circulated through every mailbox, anonymously. The residents knew the truth. That their leaders had picked a fight with the one man they couldn't afford to antagonize, and lost. By the end of that meeting, 3 board members had resigned on the spot. Karen tried to hold on for 2 more days. Then she stepped down for health reasons, though we all knew it was because her reign had imploded under the weight of her own arrogance. The HOA collapsed like a paper house in a storm. The fountains never turned back on. The clubhouse was padlocked. And my dock? It became a symbol. Local fishermen would paddle by and give me a wave, some of them whispering, "You're a legend, man." My mailbox filled with thank you notes. Anonymous letters from other HOA members trapped under tyrannical boards, begging for advice. One guy from 2 counties over asked if I'd consult for his lawsuit. I didn't respond. I wasn't doing this for fame. I was doing it for Annie. For the right to sit on my dock and watch the sun set without clipboard bullies hovering over my shoulder. And then I installed the sign, a big one, carved into a slab of cedar and sealed with varnish. It read, "No HOA fishing allowed. Private waters. Owner enforced." I bolted it to the dock post where Karen once tried to screw in her little violation plaque. Let it shine like a beacon of reclaimed liberty. A few days later, I took Annie back out on the lake. Just the 2 of us, her sketchbook in her lap, the sail full of wind. No drones, no threats, no noise but the ripple of the hull and the call of distant loons. She looked at me and smiled for the first time in weeks, the kind of smile that reaches all the way to the soul. And in that moment, I knew it was over. I didn't just win a legal case. I broke a system that thought it could own everything. A system that tried to claim the water, the sky, and even the peace inside my own family. But justice, real justice, that comes like a tide. Slow, relentless, unstoppable. And when it rolls in, the ones who tried to stand against it get swept away. I leaned back, watching the sky turn gold above the lake, and thought to myself, let them build all the rules they want, just not on my water.